Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Andrew, and welcome to today's podcast. And before I begin today's discussion, let me ask you some questions about the last stories that you've read. They could be books, they could be movies, or even your own. What were they about? What kind of environments did they live in? What kind of characters were there? What emotions did they bring out? There's a lot of underlying features and topics in stories that I bet you can personally relate to. I hope it's mostly good, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. There's so much crazy stuff going on right now. You've seen it, I've seen it, the good and the ugly. Seems more ugly than good, whether in real life or the stories we consume. Think about the last story you watched or read that really struck you. For me personally, I like to resonate with The Hunger Games, an entertaining story that can connect you with aspects of real life here in America. It feels familiar when looking at the Capitol and seeing the gold and the luxury while people starve and suffer in the districts. That's the part we don't always talk about. These stories feel extreme, but they feel possible because they are possible. They are our realities. So here's the true question. Is dystopian fiction really fiction? Or are these stories showing us something real, something we already live with every day? Today I'm going to break that down with you, so I hope you're locked in with me. Part 1. What is dystopia? Let's start simple. A dystopian society is where things have gone wrong, the opposite of this utopia. People are fighting, people are suffering, freedom is limited, power is controlled by a small group of people. Usually, one group benefits while another struggles. That's really it. That's the core idea. Now pause and think. Does that sound completely fictional? Or does it sound like something we've seen before, that we live in, that we see almost every day? Because that's the truth. Dystopia is not just an idea, it's a pattern that we live with, that we see all the time. Part 2. Fiction starts with a reality. Writers don't create in a vacuum. They don't just invent ideas out of nowhere. They observe the world. They study people. They notice the problems. Then they take these problems and push them forward. Dystopian fiction does exactly that. It takes real life issues like inequality, control, and suffering and kind of exaggerates them for usually entertainment purposes. But writers don't just write stories just for their audience to not absorb their work. They want their audience to use critical thinking, to understand what messages the authors are trying to portray. English teachers don't spend years hammering this exact subject into their students, but this skill is not to confuse us, but to wake us up. Part 3. Power and inequality. Let's begin with the first book I want to discuss. Everyone knows it, and I just talked about it earlier, The Hunger Games. In this story, this capital holds all the power. They are wealthy, they are comfortable. Meanwhile, the districts struggle. They live with poverty, they live with fear and control, and every year they are forced into a deadly game. Now ask yourself, do powerful groups ever benefit while others suffer? History says yes. Today says yes. We've seen systems where wealth, power, and opportunity are not equally shared. We've seen people forced into hardships while others profit. So while the games themselves are fictional, the structure is not. That's why the story feels real. We can grasp the characters and traits in these stories because we can draw the connections between stories and our own. Part 4. Loss, fear, and survival. Now let's talk about the fifth wave. Cassie starts as a normal teenager. She has a family. She has a life. Then everything changes. She loses her home. She loses her safety. She loses the world she knew. And suddenly, survival becomes everything. The cause? An alien invasion. Sure, I get it. That part is fiction. But the experience, losing everything, being forced to adapt, living in fear for your life and for your family, that happens every day. Maybe not here, but in a lot of places around the world. Wars, natural disasters, displacements of people. People all over the world face these realities. Dystopian fiction doesn't invent these struggles. It just reflects them, mirrors them so that we can see it ourselves. Part 5. Why do these stories matter? So why do we keep watching them? Why do we keep reading them? Because they make us feel something. It isn't just about the entertainment aspects of this all. It is also to make us feel something that makes us uncomfortable, to make us think, to make us pay attention. They help us understand experiences we may never live by ourselves. They build empathy, and sometimes they also push us to act. Part 6, Dystopia in America. Now, let's bring this closer to home. Let's talk about the United States. We don't usually think of America as dystopia, no matter how much we want to boast about it. But as everything, no system is perfect. Some groups face more challenges than others. Some systems don't work equally for everyone. Take the story The Hate U Give. This story shows racism and police brutality that has affected people of color for hundreds of years in this country, utilizing the government's fists and the buildup of years of discrimination and prejudice to beat down and diminish the livelihoods of large groups of people. These stories show us how systems impact real people. After its release, the Black Lives Matter movement gained national attention following the murders of multiple Black American citizens by the hands of the police, just like in the story of The Hate U Give. But, as also in the story, people didn't just stop and back down. People protested. People spoke out. People demanded change. They rallied together, understanding the power that their community brings. Utopia destroys dystopia, but as such vice versa. But that is not just a coincidence. Stories like this reflect real issues, and they help us bring these real issues into the spotlight for everyone to see. Part 7, Control over Rights. For my last book I want to look into is The Handmaid's Tale. Throughout human history, women have suffered at the hands of the patriarchy. Throughout history, women have been controlled and subjugated to not only societal roles and expectations, but their freedoms, their futures, and their bodies were stolen from them. This is why, in January of 1974, Roe v. Wade was passed through the Supreme Court's decision. Women were able to choose what to do with their bodies after thousands of women die from health complications every single year in America. The same year, the Equal Opportunity Act was passed that bans discrimination through credit transactions, ending the practice of women having to depend on husbands for nearly every way of life, because that was the way it was designed thousands of years ago. But we have enlightened and are willing to show empathy and compassion for one another. So, true, while life in America is definitely not perfect, it was a start. But now, let's see what the fruits of their labors have done in the past recent years. Recently, in 2022, Roe v. Wade was overturned by the new age Supreme Court. After all that time that women fought for was overturned just like that. The decision changed access to reproduction rights in the United States, and women once again began suffering from it. By the hands of the controlling patriarchy, a small group of people that once again desires to strip freedom away from its citizens to fit its own idealistic principles. But we've seen this before. The theme is the same: control, power, freedom. Dystopian fiction highlights these themes in ways that they're hard to ignore, considering they're spitting in our faces in real time. Part 8. Resistance is key. Here's something important to remember. Dystopian stories are not just about suffering. They are about resistance. People fight back. People organize. They refuse to stay silent. And we see this in real time too. The civil rights movement, the women's rights movement. People fought and people died. Protest, revolutions. When people fight injustice, they respond. This is a constant pattern, both in fiction and in reality. Section 9. We are not in a utopia. Let's be honest. We do not live in a perfect world. We have made progress, but we still could have improved systems and more expanded rights. But problems still exist. Inequality still exists. Biases still exist. And unfair systems still exist. But that doesn't mean everything is broken. But it doesn't mean we are immune to these dystopian patterns. Part 10. Why this matters. So why does this matter? Because recognizing these patterns is important. Dystopian fiction shows us what happens when people go unchecked. It shows that the consequences of power without accountability. It shows us what can happen when people lose their rights. And we see this in our country is becoming more dystopian every single day. These stories are warnings. No predictions, no guarantees, but these are warnings. In my final reflection, part 11, I want to go back to the main question. Is dystopian fiction really fiction? Now, the answer is not simple. Yes, it uses imagination, but it is built on real ideas, real struggles, real systems. It reflects the world we live in, sometimes clearly, sometimes in extreme ways, but always with a purpose. Dystopian fiction holds up a mirror, and sometimes we don't like what we see. So, next time you watch a dystopian story, don't just think of it as fiction. Ask yourselves, what part of this feels real? And more importantly, what can we do to make sure it doesn't become a reality and understand that when we come together as a community, humanity gains over anything that comes our way. And that is the end. I want to thank everyone for listening. Goodbye.